And we go a little something like this. Hit it.
Well, here we are back on the Friday 5 set, just a mere 7 days since we last met. The crew has gathered and is eager to begin, so let's open the door and bring them all in. Larry Schultz has returned and Mike Carl's ready to fight. Joe Ferretti's on the phone and John Gilstrap's in for Mike Height. And of course the Admiral is here from his house. He did Rome. He's here 3 days a week because his wife won't let him stay home.
There's truth.
What a week it has been, no ifs, ands, or buts, with stock market gains on 0.5% rate cuts. As you probably know, the Fed chairman's name is Jerome Powell, and he stepped up real big this week. Yes, he stepped up, and how? With these rate cuts, Democrats now have Powell in good standing as their presidential hopes rely on an economic soft landing. Speaking of presidential hopes, Trump's were again nearly derailed as yet another assassination attempt on him failed. By now you know Ryan Wesley Ruth's name, as his attempt on Trump's life bought him his 15 minutes of fame. If you're not familiar with this guy's history, well, it's all over the map, including a previous felony conviction for possession of explosives, a detonation cord, and a blasting cap. But that's not all. In fact, it's only a small part of his fun. He once fled from a traffic stop and held off the police with a fully automatic machine gun. He had other run-ins with stolen property, crack, a hit and run, and more as part of his life's journey. Yet this dude was still on the street, begging the question, why hasn't Trump hired this guy's defense attorney?
Not where I thought that was going.
Like it turns Joe's volume up. I love his laugh. This attempt wasn't in Butler, PA, but rather on a Trump golf course, and eventually the Secret Service got their man, this time without the use of deadly force. J.D. Vance doubled down and insisted Haitians are still eating your pets, while Springfield, Ohioans dealt with at least 33 bomb threats. Vance and Trump blamed Harris and Biden rhetoric for the attempts on his life, while Vance blamed the media for covering up feline fillet as a way of explaining Springfieldians' bomb threat strife. Jim Justice revealed that there's going to be no U.S. Senate debate, so if you're his opponent, Glenn Elliott, you're out of luck, mate. Big Jim said, well, the people of this state know me, and they know me really well, and he's right, they'll vote for him, and he'll be the next senator, even as from a jail cell. And, of course, every once in a while, material comes along that makes me say grazie, like North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, the self-professed black Nazi. Maybe Dustin Hoffman can update his movie The Graduate and adapt it for a year closer to when Mark was born. Mr. Robinson, are you trying to seduce me while watching tranny on girl porn?
School has already started, right?
Those were quotes from his stuff, man. I'm telling you. I'm not making that up. And lastly, in the world of bets and wages, is one I'd have lost in regards to who still uses pages. Maybe they should have a box to check when you buy one of these. Are you a terrorist or drug dealer? Check here, please. Seriously, who uses pages anymore? Well, I'll tell you. Several former members of Hezbollah.
You're on a roll, Rob.
You've missed your calling, yeah. Rob. You need to be on Sunday morning talk show.
And now would have to work 7 days a week.
That's right, yeah.
I don't appreciate you volunteering me for even more work. Our leadoff hitter, as always, Mr. Joseph Joey Toots Ferretti.
Gosh, Rob, I always hate to follow that. But anyhow, Rob, my questions this morning have to do with school absenteeism rates in West Virginia, and perhaps a broader question. What are the roles of our schools in our communities these days? And should we look more broadly at what these schools can do, what they can be, versus traditionally what we've had them do, which was teach writing and arithmetic? And I raise these questions because of my alarm from some statistics that came out of the West Virginia Department of Education about school absenteeism. And I'll get to those numbers in a second. But I'll tell you, when my mother was a school nurse for 20 years in a public school in Pennsylvania, I thought she was going to be dealing with the traditional school nurse issues, Rob, back in the day, nausea and fever and things like that. No, she came home talking about teen pregnancy, abuse and neglect, lack of nourishment, lack of clothing. And for a long time, I thought, boy, we're asking a lot of our schools to deal with such problems in society. And I've always thought that has been perhaps what has held our schools back in many ways, is that too many problems being brought to their doorstep. But then I look at this data, and I see that in West Virginia, 1 out of 4 students are chronically absent from school. In raw numbers, that's approximately 65,000 students in West Virginia are not attending school regularly. Is that not a problem? And I look at what we know exists in West Virginia in terms of our culture, which I think we have to admit we've got a problem. We're 3rd highest in child abuse and neglect reports. We are 5th highest in child poverty rates. Our local court system, and Larry and I got notices of this from our local judges, we are overwhelmed with child welfare cases to the point now where all of us are on a list to be appointed to handle these cases on behalf of students and children who are in an abuse and neglect situation. We had Amy Grady on the show probably months ago, but indicating that half of the students in her class are being raised by custodial parents. We got a problem in West Virginia, and I'm thinking maybe the schools might be part of the solution. And so if the schools are going to be a solution, we got to get the kids to school. So I think it begins here with the question of what do we do about these absentee rates, and how do we improve on that? I'm going to propose, and I think I'd like to hear from others on this, perhaps our enforcement needs to be better. Perhaps there has to be a more systematic outreach between the school and these homes. But the schools might afford ourselves an ability to get into some of these homes to figure out what is going on. Really, the schools could become potentially the eyes and ears of the community. So my questions are, specifically, how do we get these kids back to school? And secondly, are we asking too much of our schools if we ask them to be the eyes and ears of the community to investigate what's going on in some of these homes and perhaps to remedy some of the cultural issues we have in the state of West Virginia so that we're not producing generations of kids who come out not knowing anything and drug-addled and damaged to the point that they're going to be wards of the state in the future. I really am concerned about this, and I think perhaps our schools can be a part of the solution. That's my questions this morning.
Bill, let's begin with you.
Yeah, Joe, I'm not sure that we have new problems. We have a scale problem. Problems that existed 20, 30 years ago or 50, 60 years ago still exist, but they're much more pronounced. They're much larger in scope and much larger in scale. And I do not know the solution to it, and I don't think anyone does. I've often said from this seat that I think we need to take a hard look at our educational system in total. And what we're doing, I think, is looking at the existing the educational system that existed for generations and trying to make minor tweaks around the edges. I think with the scale that we have today, that's not going to work. I think we're going to have to look at the basic fabric of our education system and see where it's either meeting our demands or failing our demands or our needs, and then making adjustments or making changes. Maybe a change on the edges, there may be more fundamental changes. But until we take a hard, objective look, and that would include our legislators, our State Board of Education, our Board of Education, and the teacher and the parents, we need to take a hard look, and I think it can be done, but I don't think anyone has tried to do it. I don't think anyone is making noises about trying to do that. They continue to work at the edges, and I think we need to go to the structural core.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I have to say that I think I agree with what we've heard so far. But the parents are the key, and I think the school choice initiative is a step in the right direction. Now, I'm not saying it's the end all solution, and this data, I assume this attendance data is still bad even after school choices has come into play. But I think that's a step in the right direction. But the key is either incenting or threatening with penalties the parents, and that could take many forms. But that, to me, that's the key. It's not the kid's choice as much.
Mr. Gilstrap.
I think we've hammered on education here on the show since I've been here, and I think the system is fundamentally broken. I don't know where it's broken, but it is at its core. We hear the drumbeat of discipline, discipline, discipline. That seems to be a big issue, which not only is a problem with the miscreant kids, it's also a problem that affects the kids that really want to learn. And in the system that we have now, those are the ones that get lost in the shuffle, it seems to me. And while we're trying to figure out this mess of truancy and all of that's almost a different problem, I think we need to start prioritizing the needs of the kids who really want to be in school and really want to learn, and then figure out what to do with those who don't want to be there, put them someplace else. I don't know if it's a matter of reducing the required, the mandated age that you have to go to school. I don't know what that is in West Virginia. I'm going to assume that it's 16. I don't know. But if kids don't want to be there, then they're the parents' responsibility to do something else. I don't know what the solution is, but we have to start giving the kids who want to learn an opportunity to learn, and making the classroom a more pleasant place, not just for them, but also for the teachers. I think the idea of somehow inserting school personnel into the homes of kids, in some kind of a mandatory way, that's a loser across the board. That's how you get people hurt. And I don't know. It just that I don't see how that works at all. On the flip side of that, I think that for a lot of folks in West Virginia, the school is the source of their only good meal during the day, and that's another concern. It's a mess. Something is fundamentally broken. We start treating symptoms one at a time. That's not working. I don't think there's the heart or the willingness to just kind of wipe the slate clean and start over again. I don't know how you would do that, but in the short term, we just need to start focusing on the kids that want to learn.
Larry Schultz.
There's a couple of issues here. First of all, as a matter of law in West Virginia, school teachers are mandatory reporters of child abuse and neglect. Now, I'm not expert enough to say what the standard is with regard to how many days does a kid miss before we can conclude that this is child neglect. But clearly, to the extent there's excessive absenteeism, like a quarter of the days or more, there's a problem, and it is a mandatory duty of the teacher to report it. Now, of course, all of this isn't just something that popped onto the scene and we can't imagine why it happened. We still have the highest opiate overdose death rate in the nation per capita. So that's the problem. It's always been the problem. Now, I seem to recall reading that a few years ago, our state got billions of dollars as a result of opioid litigation. Where is that money? I would like to know. You don't ever hear too much talk about it, and I would sure like to know. That money shouldn't be used to build roads and put in red lights and roundabouts. That money needs to be used to try to cure the problem that the opioid people and the drugstores and the doctors caused. It's just that simple. In Morgan County, I remember when the data came out regarding the number of hits of opioids that were being sold, And there was one pharmacy that I think the number was over 3 million doses of opioids in 6 years in a county of 17,000 people.
Is that the one in Welch, Larry?
No, that's the one in Morgan County. And so, because that's where I live, I just paid more attention to that. You can go back and look up that data, and maybe I have those numbers somewhat wrong, but there was an awful lot of opioids being handed out, and we're now paying that price. I cannot believe that there's not a direct and very strong link between those two things. That was going on at a time when the people who are parents of young children now were kids, and they came to adulthood in the middle of this flood of opioids. It has a terrible effect upon your ability to simply do your job as a parent. Make sure the kids get up, make sure they go to school, help them with their homework, all those basic things. There's 100 other issues, but that one and the vanishing of the opioid settlement are two questions that I would like to see resolved, and I think we'll see some answers in that.
West Virginia First Foundation recently, I believe, released $19 million that is available for grants throughout the communities who apply for those grants. So that's one tranche of money that will soon become available.
Are those available to the schools?
They're available to whomever applies for them.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone qualified to apply.
But there's a Gordian knot here, too. You got to wait. When you're waking up to start your day, you got to wake up to start your day to do something, which means mom and dad have to have employment someplace. And they have to be sober enough to go to the employment. But if part of the problem of the addiction, I would think, is the lack of employment and the poverty and such that exists in here. It really is. It's hard to find which string to pull first to untie this knot.
And this is the point I think Joe is asking. How do you address this? We have a lot of different components, a lot of part of the demographics that's involved. But there's only one group that I think that has the muscle and the muscle to get things moving, and that's our legislators. Our legislators have talked about this, but I have not seen anything the legislators have done except pick at the edges. There have not been very much time. Our efforts have been with reduction of income tax or other things. I would like to see our legislators take on this education problem full hilt and spend a lot of time. They're the ones that can pull the various folks together. May not be able to take action, but at least they can start the communication dialogue of trying to understand the problem, the core of the problem, and the potential solution. I think it rests with the legislators.
Bill, it is payday, so allow me to defend Mr. Hornby, who's also a member of the House of Delegates, and will be paying me later today, so long as I satisfy this requirement here. They did something I thought that was a big move toward helping education in West Virginia with the Third Grade Success Act, and as that continues to unfold, so long as you can find the people, another group all the way up to third grade eventually will be in there to assist teachers. And Mike yesterday had some information which he's posted in our comments section that West Virginia has moved up from 50th to 34th in some aspects of test scores and education with kids. So I think that will be a big part of improving education in West Virginia. And in regards to the opioid issues, I think we have, if you look around this community 10 years ago compared to today, it is much easier to get help. It is much easier to find a bed. It is much easier to help your own recovery process by finding people who are now trained and things that are in place to help you progress. But it's going to take a while to catch up on that. We interviewed, a month ago, a couple of women who were involved with children who have issues from the time that they were born because their parents, when these children were in the gestation period in the womb, were being exposed to drugs. And that has an effect on those kids. And they said there's a direct link to those kids, what happened when they were in the womb, and their behaviors in the classroom. As Larry said, it's no coincidence. We had the biggest issue with drugs in this state's history, and it was the worst state affected in the country because of that. As this crisis continues and filters down to these grade school ages, you're seeing that play out in the classroom.
And Rob, thanks for mentioning Mike Hornby. I did not mean to imply there's not interest and legislators not doing something. Talking with Mike many times, Mike has a genuine concern about our education system, improving our education system. But I'll come back to the fact it is a multifaceted problem that is going to include how we incorporate the lack of parenting, the social issues, the cultural issues. It is it's a huge problem.
It is.
And I think that the adding A's in the first 3 grades is a step in the right direction, but I think that's only part of the solution. We've got a much larger problem.
It is.
As John and I both said, we have to understand the full scope of the problem before we can start getting
But
solutions.
in a state which culturally does not want the government to be a part of their lives, I can't imagine how asking the legislature to become a bigger part of their lives is going to be welcomed one way or the other. Joe, the wrap-up comes back to you.
Well, we got a law in the books. Your child shall attend school. And we need robust enforcement of that law. The city of Philadelphia recently instituted a program to deal with their absenteeism rate. They increased attendance by 10% through a carrot and stick approach. It was robust enforcement, hauling parents into court if necessary, and an outreach program between the school and these homes. And what was discovered was that a lot of problems in the homes of these students came to light. Kids who didn't want to go to school because they didn't have the right clothes and things like that. Those things can be remedied. And that's what this study found, was that when there's outreach like this, sometimes the problems are revealed and solved. So I think if we look at just the simple problem of absenteeism and think about ways to address it, I think that we can make some headway here in getting these kids back to school, because as we're all saying this morning, in some respects, the schools are a refuge for these kids. It's their best meal. It's their best socialization of the day. And we got to get them into school to experience those things. Otherwise, we're going to have generations of kids who, no matter what the legislature does, no matter how much money they put into economic development, it's not going to amount to anything if we underlying all this, if we got a society in West Virginia that cannot participate in the workforce.
Joe, I'm not sure why you have an issue following up the intros. You always knock it out of the park with your first segment. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gentlemen, don't go away. There's more of the show here. We're going to need your contributions after the break. And Mike Carl, I promise you we'll get to you too.
I'm not in the category of gentlemen.
Of course you are. You're gentleman emeritus. The studio with our producer, the sports doctor, Colin McLaughlin. They'll be busy calling Martinsburg football tonight, of course, on TV 10, Talk Radio WRNR, and our WRNR TV 10 YouTube channel. And our co-hosts here with the Friday Five via telephone, Joseph Joey Torts Ferretti. Joseph, welcome back.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
Attorney at law Lawrence Schultz. Larry.
Good to be here.
He is a defense attorney for Mark Robinson in his spare time, John Gilstrap.
Good morning.
And very effective.
You're going to need to cross off those North Carolina retirement.
Proving once again that the real show is between the commercial breaks on this program here. He is the longest tenured member of our crew, Mr. Michael Carl.
Good to be here.
And with issue number 2, the Admiral, Bill Stubblefield.
Yeah, except for wars, world wars, I think COVID was the largest disruptor of our economy than anything we've seen in a lifetime. And it's taken a while to get some semblance of normalcy. But this week, the Fed cut interest rates by 0.5%. Gas prices are falling. Interest rates are going down. Home interest rates are around 6%, whereas a year or so ago, they were close to 8%. The market is up. The gross domestic product is around 3% for the third quarter and has been consistent for the past year. According to Burns, we have the world's best economy. In the U.S., we're the only G20 country whose GDP, gross national product, exceeds that of the pre-pandemic level. So all indicators are the economy is improving. The trend is in the right direction. will it be enough to impact the election? Or is the election already baked in terms of the economy, that regardless of how we're improving, if we're improving, is that going to make any difference at all in the election?
Good point, Bill. And Frank, unless I missed it, I thought there would be more Republican complaining about Powell dropping interest rates 0.5% ahead of the election here. Unless there was some that I missed, I really thought that there would be a lot more Republicans complaining about that.
Trump tried to. Trump made a couple of passing barbs at it, but you're right. There was not very much.
Mr. Ferretti, you go first.
Well, I'm very familiar, Bill, with your statistics and how well the economy is doing on many measures, and relatively speaking, as you point out, because compared to other industrialized countries, we have fared remarkably well coming out of COVID. However, the vexing problem for those who would try to stand on this good economic news is the fact that everything costs more. And I went back and looked at, knowing that seems to be the big issue, the inflation and how much a box of Cheerios costs these days. I went and compared the pricing of our goods and services and compared that to wage growth in the country in the last 4 years, or during the Biden administration. And what I saw was inflation outstripping wage growth in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. And that has stuck in people's mindsets, I believe, is that they know they have paid more for things and their wages didn't go up to meet the cost of goods and services. Now, what we've seen, though, is a reversal even of that trend. We're now in the last reporting by the Department of Labor, August 2024, wages went up 4.6%. Inflation was 2.5%. So now, and this has been true for the past 13 months, wage growth is accelerating more than inflation. So we are catching up even in that part of the economy. So I just think it's taking time for that to settle in, for people to appreciate that. And look, it's just human nature. You go to the store, you know you're paying more for stuff, and you focus on that more than perhaps a bigger paycheck that you're bringing home. So that continues to be a problem politically for the Democrats going forward. I don't know that mindset is going to be changed much before November, where it's only 45, 46 days before we vote. I don't think you're going to change that mindset. But if you look at the data, it ain't all bad.
Mr. Gilstrap, are you buying into the Stubblefield-Ferretti theory that the economy looks pretty good under Biden-Harris?
I call this, Bill and I have talked about this off the air, I call it the shadow economy, that we keep getting told that we're better than everybody else, that things are getting better, it's not as bad as it feels, but that still comes down to the fact that we're paying 25% more for less stuff in the box. The Chicago fire ultimately went out because it ran out of fuel. Everything ultimately ends one way or the other. So this horrific spree of inflation and the awful economy, it's going to settle itself out, but Chicago is still burned to the ground, and the economy is still where it is. Everything is still woefully in bad shape. Only 1 out of 3 Americans can put their hands on $1,000. We got consumer debt is through the roof. Everything is more expensive. So will we survive it? Sure we will. We'll figure out a way to survive anything. Is it going to affect the election? No, because people are still hurting. They still can't. The house that they wanted to buy, that couple wanted to buy when interest rates were 2% and 3%, they couldn't afford it when it was 7% and 8%. So they got something they didn't want, and now they're stuck with it. So they're going to remember that. The car that they wanted to get they couldn't afford, they're stuck with the one that they didn't want. So now that's what they're going to remember. Next election cycle, maybe.
Larry Schultz.
Yes, to focus on one item that Joe talked about, the price of breakfast cereal. It's a pretty common thing, especially for families with kids. I don't know about you, but I eat breakfast cereal almost every day. It's a whole lot easier than mom spending a half hour cooking breakfast. And so you'd eat, milk on cereal. General Mills raised their prices by 25% on a box of Cheerios or whatever the brands are that they make. I think Cheerios is one of them.
It is.
Then they engaged in a giant stock buyback. Their executives got huge raises. In other words, not all of that was driven by what we think of when we think of inflation is the cost of fuel and the cost of the raw materials and the cost of the boxes and all that stuff going way up. Not all that was driven by that. It was an opportunity for them to put some money in their pocket, and they did it. Now, I believe that we could have a stronger Federal Trade Commission and do a little bit of review of some of this when these inflationary things begin. Because certainly raw material prices go up, the price of the finished product is going to go up, but it doesn't necessarily have to go up by 25%. And we need to take a look at that in some of these cases of basic staples. All that said, I don't know how much effect it's going to have. Remember, we all tend to think of this as a national election, but what it really is 50 state elections because of the Electoral College. And I would say that, for example, Governor candidate Robinson down in North Carolina is likely by himself to have more of an impact on this election than the price of cereal because North Carolina could flip.
And fact-checking Mr. Schultz, since February of 23, General Mills has bought back $1.8 billion of their own stock. Mr. Michael Carl.
Well, first of all, I do think it will have some effect on the election, but I think that effect will be because most people understand that we were, before COVID, when Trump was president, we had a strong economy, growing, and a lot of good things. We were spending too much money, but the system was working. And I will give credit to all parties in terms of the immediate reaction to COVID and it and the spending that was allocated and shared around. But by the time Trump left office, inflation was down, and it was recreated by the outrageous overspending by the Biden administration. And now the reason that things are getting better is because of the free enterprise system is so strong, and any price gouging, that ought to be investigated. That makes sense, because what price gouging is contrary to the proper exercise of the free enterprise system. So, but I think that's why things are getting better. But I think most people who actually go vote understand that Trump was a lot stronger for the economy than Biden has been.
Mr. Stubblefield, it comes back to you.
Yeah, I think it's probably not have much impact on the election. I am seeing some polls that suggest that Harris has cut the differential between the confidence in the economy between herself and Trump. Whether or not it's going to make enough of a difference, we're so close to the election. I suspect that it's pretty much baked in, except for a very thin group of voters, and I don't know how they're going to jump.
I heard from a polling company this morning on one of the reports out of Washington, D.C., the radio station that I listened to on my drive in, and they were talking about this surveying that they had done 2 months before the debate, and then directly after the debate. And they were shocked to see that the numbers were nearly identical, that there wasn't much of a movement. Harris picked up a little bit in terms of people having faith in her on the economy, which was her weak point. But by and large, the needle hadn't moved. People are pretty much dug in on who they're going to vote for.
Rob, that's not surprising. Go back a few years or so ago, after debate, I think there was a 16-point swing. We do not have that margin of uncertainty now. At the very most, you're going to get a 0.5% or 1% or 2%. Well, you're not going to see a major swing either way because folks have made up their mind. There's a very narrow group of folks that's going to determine this election.
On to issue number 3, and for that, in the Mike Height seat, Mr. John Gilstrap.
All right, I want to talk about all the high-fiving and happy dancing that's been going on about the pager issue, the exploding pagers among Hezbollah. Terrorism works by making people afraid to do the things that they ordinarily do. It changes their lives. In my lifetime, 9/11 was absolutely the most spectacular terror attack, but the DC sniper attack was the most effective terror attack of my lifetime. I was in the epicenter of that, and people were afraid to do anything. They were afraid to pump gas. They were afraid to mow their lawn, to walk to school. It really, for those 3 weeks in October of 2002, people really were terrified. It was a terror attack. Now, a lot of the presumptions about that proved to be wrong, and those guys were captured and punished. But it proved just how easy it is to frighten suburbia into paralysis. And I don't know if this is a particularly American thing because we're not used to being under attack like that. Now let's shift to what happened with Hezbollah. I really think that while blowing up Hezbollah terrorists, 3,000 of them, it's easy to say, well, that's a really good thing. We know who they are. They're bad guys. But this was a state-sponsored effort to put explosives into consumer electronics. And the fact that the good guys got the idea first does not obviate the fact that now the idea is out there. Now, imagine what the future holds. With all of the cheap products you can order online, it doesn't have to be organized where things go off at once. You can have somebody a baby monitor, a hearing aid, I don't know, a portable radio, and suppose it goes off on an airplane. So I think that what happened in what Israel did with the pagers and the radios the day afterwards sort of set a new bar of what is considered to be appropriate by a government. And if it's appropriate for a government, how can it be condemned by the individual? I'm very concerned about this, and it's TSA proof. You know, whatever it is that they did by injecting a small amount of explosives into the battery, apparently, and getting a significant explosion out of it, it's terrifying. So my question to the panel is, what's next? Do we just live with this danger? Is there, what do y'all think?
Are you saying they crossed the line?
They did cross the line. I think they lost their. I have been in lockstep with Israel ever since October 7th, and everything they've done. This is where they crossed the line, and I think we're in trouble. I think the world is in trouble now with this new level.
This is an interesting premise, especially with your last sentence with it too, because obviously there's been a lot of civilian casualties, women, small children, and you've been in lockstep with that. But they found a way to directly get into the terrorist hands, pockets, and homes to blow them up specifically. And on this, you have an issue.
I do. And I also think they wasted an opportunity. Why didn't they listen to them? You know, instead of blowing them up, why didn't they track them and listen to them and gather intel instead of just blowing them up?
Interesting point. Mr. Ferretti, you go first.
Well, it raises a couple issues, I think. Number one, there's a Notre Dame professor on international law who already spoke on this, John. It is a war crime, what Israel did. Now, a lot of people would take umbrage with that, and I'm sure would lump people who feel that way in with the college protesters and things like that. But it is a war crime. It just doesn't meet the definition of that. You cannot arm or weaponize objects that civilians use on a regular basis. And civilians were killed in this, in addition to a lot of Hezbollah agents. But I think this points out, as you're theorizing, John, this, I think, points out the strategic importance of Taiwan. Let's accept the fact that Taiwan is where most of our electronic products are produced, and the computer chips that go in those products. If China was to take over Taiwan, can you imagine the risk of weaponization of consumer electronic products that might take place given that scenario? So I immediately thought about that and how Taiwan becomes an even more important issue going forward. And secondly, let's accept also that this country is already doing what Israel has done. There's the information from Edward Snowden, the guy who turned on U.S. military and security forces and revealed a bunch of information. Part of the information from Ed Snowden was that the NSA was intercepting laptop computers made by the Cisco company and planting chips before they were shipped overseas. And some of them were shipped in this country. And that's your own national security agency doing that. So this is I agree, John, it's a problem going forward. It's going to be a vexing problem, especially for people who work, like you said, in the TSA. And you just wonder about our vulnerabilities on land and in the air.
Very good, Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, not to bring this back to our earlier discussion, but couldn't you do the same sort of thing with boxes of Cheerios, if indeed Hamas happened to eat breakfast like we do? You could take almost any consumer product, especially food, and make it deadly. So
they
that
did with
everybody,
Tylenol in the 1980s.
yeah, and
Well, my understanding, the lithium battery was a key component in making this an explosive event, and you wouldn't typically have that inside cereal.
no, and we're not, we're talking about death by poisoning as opposed to death by explosion, and an explosion will usually kill not just the guy who's holding the walkie-talkie, but the 8 guys sitting around him. So it's more efficient, I guess you would say. But a lot of these things are possible, have obviously been possible for a while with all kinds of consumer products. But yes, to systematically do that, now, I don't doubt when Joe says that's classified as a war crime, but the response is always going to be, okay, then how many of our citizens must die before we kill these people? And it's a very, I'm not saying I have an answer, it's a very difficult conundrum. And are you taking the chance that your telephone will someday, your new telephone, when you get a new one, everyone's all excited when that happens, won't blow up on you? You can't say for sure. I'm not sure exactly, is it explosives that kill the person and everyone around them, or is it explosives on an airplane that cause the airplane to crash? In other words, your walkie-talkie blows up, and now the plane is, I don't know exactly how that part works, but it's a vexing problem.
Billy?
Yeah, one of the issues that John's raised is selectivity. Unlike your cereal, that would be go out to everybody. Here in this case, it was selective toward one particular group. An extension of this, which is well within the realm of possibility, because we do not have total control of the supply chain. The chips are made in Taiwan, has been mentioned. So we do not have total control. It is, I think, conceivable that someone could program a chip on a phone, for example, that would be very selective in the audience. For example, if you listen to or access MSNBC, you could program an explosive to go out toward those folks, or Fox News, whatever the case may be. You could be very selective in your target. And that is something that would be just an extension of what we found in Lebanon.
Michael, there I am, Michael Carl.
Well, I totally disagree that it's a war crime. that the word war is essential to it. They're in a war. They're in a war for survival, and if our dropping an atomic bomb in Japan was not a war crime, this is not a war crime. When your actual existence and national survival has been threatened, and the clear intent of your enemy is to eliminate you and your country, then anything that you need to do to stop that is legitimate.
Comes back to you to wrap it up, Mr. Gilstrap.
The difference, Mike, I think, is dropping an atomic bomb was a strategic move against a culture that had been at war for a long, long time, and their intent was proven. In the case of these pagers, these were presumed Hezbollah terrorists who were punished for crimes that they were presumed to be about to commit one day. They were not shot down in the midst of committing a crime. They were killed on the presumption that, or hurt, attacked, maimed on the presumption that one day they would. And there's just something fundamentally wrong with that in my heart. I could be wrong, but that's just how it strikes me.
There's no one injured in or killed in the World War II bombing of Japan that wasn't innocent, And now the most significant thing of all is that Japan is one of our strongest, most important allies.
Joe, did you have a thought? You got 20
Mike,
seconds to get it out.
Yeah, Mike, I got to tell you, by definition, dropping the A-bomb was a war crime. And the only reason we didn't get prosecuted was we won the war. If the Germans had bombed Pittsburgh, but yet lost the war, we would have charged the Germans with a war crime for killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. To the victor goes the spoils. And that's by definition, it was a war crime.
Well,
morally, you may say
you have to win a war. And whatever you need to do to win a war, you need to do. And I believe America was right, and so does Japan now.
And on that note, we take our break here, and we're back with more with Mr. Schultz on the clock. Skinner playing us into the break. This date 2010, Leonard Skinner passed away. He was a teacher, and he actually had many members of the band Leonard Skinner in his class, and they named their band after him, kind of as a mock tribute. He was a former soldier as well. Apparently, as they would say in the day, he didn't take a lot of guff. So he was fairly strict from as they tell the story. We are on to issue number 4, and with issue number 4, Mr. Lawrence Schultz.
Yes, currently pending on the running out schedule of the sitting governor of West Virginia, Mr. Justice, is a proposal for a 5% personal income tax reduction. If that is passed, will it begin to allow West Virginia to pay its own bills, or will we remain hopelessly mired in federal dependency? I'm always told that tax cuts pay for themselves, so soon we'll no longer be a taker state, right?
The state has a $5 billion budget, but when you take in all the money that comes in to the state, it's actually $20 billion. $15 billion of that comes from the federal government. $5 billion is generated by the state of West Virginia, hence the $5 billion local budget there. Now, with that question posed, I go to Mr. Michael Carl, who is our foremost expert on taxes.
Well, you lower the tax rate, you actually raise the tax revenues, and that happened at the federal level. It happens at the state level, but I think Justice's proposal is just a stunt, for the election, and I don't think the Republican legislature is going to embrace it and make it happen. He blocked the constitutional amendment that would have enabled the correct easing of income taxes and personal property taxes. He would later worked with the legislature for legislation that somewhat moves in that direction and is doing a good job. But if you lower the rates, you will raise the revenues, but it's not going to happen, and it'd be my personal prediction.
That was an interesting blender that you put Mr. Carl in there, Larry, because he had, on one hand, he had to defend cutting taxes to generate more revenue, but on the other hand, he couldn't defend Jim Justice doing it because he just doesn't like him. So that was an interesting.
I don't like him because of the way he's conducted himself as governor, starting with asking for a $500 million tax increase in his first State of the State address.
And we move on to Mr. Stubblefield, your response.
Yeah, I've given Mike Hornby credit a couple of times today. I'm going to give him another one as well. He's been highlighting the fact that we're more of a taker than what most folks assume. If you ask the typical West Virginia how much we're getting from the federal government, there'll be kind of a blank stare. And when you look at the amount of dollars we receive from the federal government, it's absolutely shocking. Unless
75 cents out of every dollar.
Yeah, unless we start taking steps to wean ourselves from being a dependent of the federal government, the day will come when the federal government pulls the rug out from under us, and we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I don't see that we're taking steps right now to wean ourselves from the federal government.
Larry, question for you, though. Are we answering your question as you posed it?
Well, I think so. I mean, partly it was, you could tell it was a little tongue-in-cheek.
No, not with you. Come on.
But, part of the problem, of course, is that that a 5% state income tax cut, no matter how much new revenue it produces, ain't going to come anywhere near producing $15 billion a year. So I realize that the question is a bit
loaded
in that respect. But what is the plan going forward? This state is controlled by a party that says, "Oh, government spending is way too high," despite the fact that they support a president who ran up over $8 trillion in debt in 4 short years. Federal spending is too high, except for the part that comes to us. I have a real problem with that, and that's really the root of the question.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, I'm glad to hear Mike Carl say that this is a political stunt, because it clearly is. The question about whether tax cuts increase revenue, to me, the real question is, does it increase revenue enough to pay for the cuts? And I suspect that after hearing some testimony from Senator Tarr and his appearance on this show and other shows, that they don't feel that there's going to be enough revenue enhancement from tax cuts to offset the hit to the state budget. And so they would have to cut services. And no candidate for office in this election cycle wants to be in that position. So this is not going to pass. And I don't think our situation in West Virginia is going to change anytime soon in terms of being dependent on the federal dollar for balancing budgets and handling the myriad of problems we have in this state. And a lot of them go back to my initial subject, the resources necessary to fund schools and make sure that we're able to get kids to class. All that takes money. Truancy officers and the ability to go to the court system and have a school representative there to testify, that takes resources and money. And cutting at this point to offset a 5% tax cut, income tax cut, is just not on the plate for this legislature.
New York Times bestselling author John Gilstrap.
I go back to the Gordian knot. How do we get West Virginia to grow? The 5% income tax, yeah, I guess the governor wants to be able to say that he cut personal income tax by 30%. I guess that's the thing that he wants to leave with. I don't think it'll pass. I don't think it should pass. The argument, though, is the income tax is keeping people out of the state. They're keeping people from relocating to the state because you have to pay too much to live here. I don't think that's what's keeping people from living here, because people are moving to places like New Jersey and to New York. Certainly they have a lot more people than we do. I've told the story before. I had an opportunity to move to a very nice job, to follow my job to East Camden, Arkansas, when I was working for the explosives plant. And I didn't go for one reason. Well, first of all, it's Arkansas. The other one was the education system. The education system was horrible. Our son was little, so we were not going to go there. And until we fix the fundamentals, until we have a better education system and we have less addiction problems, and we have an economy that works, we've got a real problem. Can we Can we fix that through reducing taxes? I don't know. I'm not an economist. I have a hard time making those numbers work. However, if reducing the personal income tax does in fact draw businesses in, and then as you get more affluent people who prioritize education for their kids, maybe that's what we need to spend more money on the educational system, and then that improves education. I don't know what string on the knot to pull.
Larry, comes back to you.
It is difficult for me to understand how it is that a state that is so far dependent upon the federal government can consider saying, okay, let's take some money out of our own budget, and at the same time, let's do a better job in the schools. I don't think those two things are going to happen without funds. In private industry, you say, hey, I need to add some workers to accomplish this one aspect of what we're doing that's not working so well. And so you raise your budget and you raise maybe the price of what you're doing to the extent that you can without losing market share, and you go forward from there. Somehow we think the reverse will work. By cutting taxes, we can add services. And that's just not going to happen without Uncle Sam writing some of the checks.
Did we just get through an entire Larry Schultz segment without mentioning Donald Trump?
We did. And I wanted to point out, because William Whittington on our Facebook comment section said, can we have one Friday where there's no mention of Trump? And we just did it.
I did point out that without mentioning his name, that he ran $8 trillion in deficits.
You did refer. You did
an
refer.
all-time record.
You did refer. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a reference without the name actually being mentioned. Yeah, but I hope you made Mr. Whittington's day.
He's not worthy of discussion, let's face it.
All right, on to issue number 5, the anchor leg, Mr. Michael Carl.
Well, I want to bring up the fact that President Biden made a fairly long speech yesterday, and he was effectively claiming that the Federal Reserve was able to reduce the interest rates because of the good job that his administration had done with the economy. Now, of course, that's absurd, but I think just the quality of his presentation compared to what we've heard from Harris, who would want to spend the same thing, suggests that he's far more competent than she is. So what do you think?
What is your question, though?
Yeah,
is Biden more competent than Harris?
Yes. Yeah, that's the question.
In a way, you're complimenting Biden.
Well, compared to Harris, who I don't have a lot of respect for, that's not much of a compliment, but it's relatively to between the two of them.
A pig just flew past the window. Yeah. I saw it.
I saw it too. I mean, Biden has been, undercover for, many, many weeks now, and he comes out and did functionally, I think, mechanically, a pretty good presentation, spinning, what I don't agree with the ultimate conclusion, that his economic policy is, led to the rate reduction. But it did suggest to me that he's far more effective than Harris. So what's that tell you about Harris?
Well, this is interesting because in the last 10 minutes, Mike Carl has disagreed with the tax cut and praised Joe Biden.
Well,
so we just
it's all relative. Trump is better than both of them by a mile, if you want me to get back on track.
But we don't appreciate it. Just I feel kind of like I'm in the wrong universe right now. This is one of those Seinfeldian episodes, the anti-crew there. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I mean, I would define that as faint praise. I mean, what Mike has said is that Biden's full of crap, but his presentation was pretty good.
That's still praise, Joe.
Look, I think if we're talking about presentations and how things are going in the Harris campaign, I think she has made some improvements. I think she has come forward in interviews now, and she sounded like somebody who understands the issues. She may not be as concrete or as defined as other people would like at this point, but she's making the effort, and I think she realizes what her shortcomings are. So, I don't think that at this point, comparing her to Biden's presentation is all that unfair of a comparison for Harris. I think she's improving, and I think she'll continue to improve up until Election Day.
Mr. Schultz.
In 2022, we were told by not one or two, but 65% of economists surveyed who told us we were headed for a recession for sure. And we continued to hear this from them all through 2023. Now, we're having what everybody told me when I studied economics is impossible, a soft landing. There is no giant recession. There aren't 9% of our people who want to work out of work. There are jobs. In fact, one of the problems we have right now is there aren't always enough jobs or enough people to serve the jobs that we have. And so that's Springfield, Ohio's issue. That's why they wanted Haitian immigrants to come to their town, because they did not have enough people to run the factories.
Little did they know at the time, though.
Yeah, well, little did they know it was going to end up with irresponsible, racist things ending in bomb threats to their children. That's kind of a sad thing. But this is a soft landing. I'm not hearing very many Republican economic enthusiasts tell us about this soft landing, and I would like to hear whether anybody on this has ever experienced one of these in this country before.
Mr. Gilstrap, can you defend the other side on this one?
Are we still on Mike's question?
We are.
Okay.
They're on Larry's response.
No.
Larry's response.
I'm going to Mike's question. I don't think it's at all surprising that the guy that actually got 14 million Democratic votes is doing better than the one who didn't get any votes at all. So, it all comes down to who put the stuff into the teleprompter, right? And Joe, with all respect, when we hear that, well, she continues to improve. That's great when you're talking about a fifth grader who's doing the spelling bee. We're talking about the presidency of the United States. I don't know that anybody's got. Again, the cake is baked at this point. I really do think that's the case. Her word salads have become far less dense than they used to be. She gets to the point more quickly than I am in what I'm saying right now. But so. I admire the fact that Larry was able to fit in all three of the points that you were proposing for the panel today. Biden is a faded form of what used to be a reasonably effective senator. So I expect him to have a better command of data than Kamala Harris. So I am not surprised that that's the case.
Billy?
Yeah, I'm finding this discussion to be very tiring. We've discussed this over and over, and we're baked in. The folks that, such as, I'm going to point Mike Carl out, Mike is not going to ever see anything positive for Kamala Harris or Biden. By the same token, Larry Schultz not going to see anything positive about Trump. And they represent a large part of our population. 48% of the folks are going to be anti-Harris, anything she does. 48% of our population is going to be anti-Trump, whatever they do. I think it's going to be much more telling what happens on November the 5th, and it's going to change the dynamics. Looking back at how someone delivers a speech, at least especially Biden, adds very little to the conversation.
Comes back to you, Michael.
Well, I take it that you all essentially reluctantly agree that Biden did look better than Harris has been looking. And Harris's real trouble is that her far left speeches are all recorded and being played, at least in the media that I watch, quite a bit. So, ultimately, the serious voters care about the real issues and not style, and that's important to Trump for sure. So I'm going to predict a Trump victory.
We have a bonus 3 minutes here, Joe, and I'm going to go to you with one of your premises, and that was, how long will it be before West Virginia's next governor has to appoint a new U.S. senator to hold Justice's seat until the next election? Joe, what are you implying by that? Was that yours?
That was mine.
All right, that was from Carl. Oh, you're right. It was from Carl. Yeah. What are you implying by that?
Well, I just think that Justice, and I'm not sure how it's going to materialize, but I think Justice is going to have a lot of trouble functioning as a U.S. senator. You can't play that role the way he's played the role of governor in many, many ways. You have to physically be on the floor of the Senate in Washington, D.C. to vote as a senator. And so I think ultimately, and I'm not saying, it won't shock me if some proceeding, something he's done comes back to haunt him. But I think his motivation will diminish once he sees what is expected of him as a U.S. senator. I think it's all about glory and ego that he's running it for senator. I don't think he has a policy agenda that he knows what it will take to implement as a U.S. senator representing West Virginia. I
thought you were implying that because of some of the money issues, the tax issues, that he would never even make it to that seat.
Well, I'm throwing out, there's all kinds of things.
You're saying once he sees the workload, he's not going to want to.
Well, I'm saying that'll be part of it, and all the hassles that he's created, with his economics, will just add up, and all those things coming together, and I think he may withdraw or resign at some point.
With the issues that have been much publicized, we have a minute left here, Mike. If there is to be a penalty, are these going to be mostly civil penalties, or are there criminal penalties involved that could involve jail time?
I'm not aware of any criminality, but that's good aggressive lawyers can come up with charges some way if they want to, but I don't know that's but it's mostly all civil. Yeah.
So nothing that would preclude it from taking off.
No. I don't see that, and in fact, even criminal charges or even a conviction, I don't think legally disqualifies you from being.
I don't believe it does.
A U.S.
Is he going to show up from the Greenbrier? That's the first issue.
Yeah,
I don't know if we get by that one.
Right.
Will he own the Greenbrier?
Yeah. Well, another good point.
Final thoughts.
He'll be skipping his rent.
8 seconds apiece. Get him ready. Final thoughts. We start on the phone with Joe Ferretti. 8 seconds. Go. Did we lose Joe? All right, in that case, we pick it up and go with Larry. You're up, Larry.
Going to be a beautiful weekend. Get out there and split that firewood. If you're short of firewood and you need that exercise, give me a call.
Bill Stubblefield.
I'm going to do just that. I got a big tree I'm going to cut and split.
Mr. Carl.
Because the Cards failed to sweep the Pirates this past week in St. Louis. They only have 9 games left to overcome the 8-game deficit for the wild card.
Mr. Gilstrap.
So happy it's autumn.
Oh, first day of autumn is Sunday, indeed. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your final Friday of the summer. This is Talk Radio, WRI Martinsburg and TV10, and we'll talk to you again in 70 short hours.
It's 5 o'clock.